SEP FanFic Readings presents Thanks to the Photographs by Unstable Hufflepuff. Chapter 12. The night, too, was wonderful. Whatever Hermione expected Knot Manor to look like, this wasn't it. Sure, the outside did the Knot family justice. The estate had an awfully imposing and sinister feel to it, reminding her of the mansion from Clue. The interior, however, was extravagant in the worst way possible. Kneeling on the first-floor sitting-room sofa, she was surrounded by plush purple furniture, black leather, gold accents that would have been extremely tacky had they not been real gold, and various fur rugs that matched nothing. There was also a concerning amount of mirrors in the manor. She didn't have to move so much as a meter in order to see her reflection, no matter where she was. "You know," Pansy slurred, kneeling next to her with a fizzy drink in one hand, while the other was pointing an accusatory finger at Hermione. "I hated you." "I hated you too," Hermione exclaimed excitedly. "You were so annoying," cried Pansy in anguish. "And you were a bitch." She giggled, wobbling slightly, and some of her drink spilled on the sofa cushions. "Yeah," she said amusedly, "I totally was." Hermione burst out laughing, spilling some of her own drink as she fought to stay upright. Her free hand went to clutch her stomach as she met Pansy's gaze, who abruptly joined her, snickering uncontrollably. Both their eyes were filled with tears by the time Pansy calmed down enough to splutter, "Let's be friends." "Okay." She flung her arms around Hermione's neck, somehow knocking both their drinks over and sending her tumbling backwards at the same time. They both promptly rolled off the sofa, landing tangled together and laughing on the plush zebra print rug. Draco, Knot, and Sabini all exchanged dark looks from the sofa opposite. "Well, gentlemen," said Sabini abruptly, raising his tumbler to his lips, "it's official. Hell has frozen over." "I was prepared for them to hate each other forever," said Draco, swallowing a large gulp of his own drink and grimacing slightly at the taste. "All I really wanted was for them to at least tolerate each other's presence. This," he waved his hand in the direction of Hermione and Pansy, who were now arguing over who got to braid whose hair, "is just disturbing." "Agreed," said Knot grimly. "No, no, no!" shrieked Hermione suddenly, slapping a hand over Pansy's mouth to stop her from singing along to the Celestina Warbeck song playing on the wireless. "Stop! Celestina Warbeck is a horrible singer. Have you no taste?" "Excuse you," said Pansy, slapping her hand away and looking deeply offended. "You're the one with no taste if you think Celestina is a bad singer. She's the singing sorceress." Hermione groaned. "Ron's mother is obsessed with her," she said gravely. "Every Christmas she'd walk around singing, 'A cauldron full of hot, strong love.' And now every time I hear it, I feel like my ears are starting to bleed." Pansy nodded, very serious. "You're right. Celestina Warbeck is horrendous. I haven't the slightest idea why she's so popular." "You know who you'd like?" said Hermione brightly, straightening up and placing her hands on Pansy's shoulders. "The Spice Girls." "The who?" asked Pansy. "No, you'd probably hate them," said Hermione dismissively. "I'm so lost right now," Pansy blinked. "You have pink stuff on your shirt." "Yeah, 'cause you spilled the drinks on us, you bitch. Look at your dress." She glanced down at herself, and then looked at Hermione in horror. "I did! I know!" "I feel like I should be putting a stop to this," said Draco uneasily. Zabini narrowed his eyes at him. "Don't you fucking dare." Draco did, in fact, end up putting a stop to this an hour later when Hermione and Pansy decided it would be a brilliant idea to go skinny dipping in one of the manor's large bathtubs. There were actual tears of sadness from both of them when he and Knot worked to physically remove them from each other's grasp. Drunk or not, Draco normally would have apparated back to Hogwarts. He told Hermione as they stumbled out the front doors, but he didn't want to risk it while she was with him. Left with no other option, they wound up spending the next hour toppling over each other and bumping into a number of snoring hags on the night bus. Hermione was honestly surprised she didn't vomit onto the grass when they finally arrived in Hogsmeade Village. Draco looked frighteningly pale, stepping off the bus, one hand pressed against his stomach. She wasn't entirely sure how they managed to make it back to the castle. There was a lot of tripping and the knocking over of rubbish bins, and Draco fell enough times that his arse was sure to be bruised the following morning. It almost felt as though she blinked, and they were suddenly standing in the courtyard just outside the great oak doors of the castle. The walk in the fresh air did wonders for her. though it still took effort not to sway where she stood as he handed her a lit cigarette. It truly was a beautiful night, the perfect end to the wonderful day that she would not soon forget, despite the alcohol. Hermione tilted her head up to look at Draco as she took a long drag, her lungs filling with smoke that helped to steady her just a bit. Standing much taller than her, he was like a dark silhouette imprinted on the moon. His face wasn't all that pointy anymore, and right now he didn't wear that same haughty expression she knew from their childhood. He held his cigarette between his lips, flexing his jaw as he used the tip of his wand to ignite it. She wondered if his hair was soft, or if her fingers would get covered in slimy hair potion if she were to run her hands through it. His eyes were a shade of gray, not dissimilar to that which had been Sirius Black's. He must have inherited the color from his mother.
"Granger, why are you looking at me like that?"
"You have really pretty eyes," said Hermione. Draco's eyebrows nearly shot up to his hairline. Said eyes were comically wide as he stared at her for a moment before clearing his throat and taking a drag. She watched him exhale the smoke, gazing upward at the stars. Veronica's words from earlier that week began to replay in her head. It really had been a long time, and it didn't have to mean anything.
"What, Granger?" Draco snapped, looking mildly uncomfortable. "Do I have something on my face?"
"Hush, I'm thinking." It was Draco Malfoy, member of the Sacred 28, sole heir of both the Malfoy and Black lines. It wouldn't mean anything at all, and if he wasn't interested, she'd just blame it on the alcohol.
"I swear to Merlin, Granger."
"Can I try something?" Hermione's gaze rested on his mouth now. She wasn't paying attention to the rest of his face, so she did not see his expression. He shuffled his feet, shifted his weight, hesitated before answering.
"And what would that be, exactly?"
he asked in a low voice, as though suddenly afraid they'd be overheard. Hermione took a step closer, and he stopped moving. Froze, more like. Almost like he was holding his breath. She let the cigarette in her hand fall to the ground, and, taking another step, carefully removed his from his grasp. She reached up tentatively, grasping his jaw, and directed his face towards her own. She looked pointedly at his mouth, then glancing up at his eyes. The spark there was enough for her to close the space between them and press her lips to his. It was soft, gentle at first, exploratory. She was merely testing the waters. But when one of his hands came to her lower back, pulling her closer so that they were chest to chest, and the other rose to hold her head as he deepened the kiss, it quickly became heated, rough, demanding. And Hermione wondered why it took her so long to realize he was right here, that she could have done this months ago when he first carried her back to her room at the end of the night, because it felt so fucking good. It felt so inexplicably right. They needed a bench, a wall, something, because there was no way she was stopping now. Not when he'd made her feel more free than she had in years, perhaps even since the war, or before she'd even been accepted to Hogwarts. Her mind was running through all their options. Her quarters were too far, as were his. They'd already been caught in the corridor after hours by a couple of students, and she wasn't willing to risk that happening again. The conclusion she eventually reached was, well, she likely wouldn't be able to look Neville in the eye tomorrow. But she was drunk, so that didn't seem very important right now. No, what was currently important was getting Draco out of his pants. Hermione pulled away slowly, biting his lower lip as she did so, and he moved with her, trying to close the gap again, but she only smirked and stepped back. He was watching her with hooded eyes, his mouth hanging partly open. She took his hand and wordlessly led him forwards as she strode backwards, and only breaking it when they reached the door to Greenhouse 2. The second he realized her intent, he was throwing the door open and dragging her inside. Within seconds, she was lifted up onto the nearest work table, and he was kissing her again, more passionately this time. His hands were on her hips, her legs were wrapped around his waist, and her fingers were running through his hair. So fucking soft. Neither of them moved for a while. Draco was slumped against her, panting into her neck, and her arms were wrapped around his shoulders as she slowly stroked his hair. This was too comfortable. This was too much. The silence was too heavy, so she broke it. Neville can never know we were the cause of this mess. He chuckled, and she relaxed, laughing a little, as he finally straightened up to tuck himself back into his pants. He was leaning back against the work table next, lighting another cigarette, by the time she finished redressing and offered it to her after taking a drag.
"I suppose I could call for a house elf to tidy up in here," he said begrudgingly. Hermione glared at him. "Oh, don't start," said Draco, rolling his eyes. He smirked at her. "Would you rather leave the place in shambles for Longbottom to deal with?" This time she was the one to roll her eyes. She handed the cigarette back to him, sighing in defeat. "That's what I thought," he said smugly. Hermione pouted at him for a moment while he watched her expectantly, obviously waiting for an SPEW speech. Eventually, she huffed another laugh and shook her head at him, smiling in exasperation. "Good night, Draco," she said, turning towards the door. Just as it was falling shut behind her, she heard him speak in a voice so soft and so warm that, had there been anyone else there, she would have thought it was someone else speaking. "Good night, Granger."